Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Concerned the Fed's going to be on hold for longer. Help
Good morning, I'm John Tucker. Here are the
Wall
stories
Street.
we're following
All
today.
The mega caps took a hit, except Nvidia, as the S&P 500 closed below 5,300. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 1.5% or more than 600 points in yesterday's trading. Swaps are now fully pricing in a full quarter-point rate cut in December versus November. Well, despite yesterday's sell-off, Alicia Levine, head of investment strategy and equity advisor solutions at BNY Mellon Investment Management, is optimistic on the stock market.
We've been very positive on the market now for about, I'd say, 15 months, because there really is very little evidence of a fundamental slowdown in the U.S. Yes, there are pockets of pain. The manufacturing base is on an upswing, and we know the awesome amount of tech spending. That's all revenue into the chip sector. Yep. So, the earnings are awesome.
BNY Mellon's Alicia Levine says the better-than-expected growth and Fed dovishness puts her year-end S&P price target at 5,400. As we mentioned, Nvidia was immune to yesterday's sell-off. It surged more than 9% to an all-time high. The wealth of Nvidia co-founder Jensen Huang now greater than each individual member of America's richest family. That story this morning from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
Jensen Huang owns 3.5% of Nvidia. Yesterday, the stock closed at a record high at roughly $1,038 a share. This gives Huang a net worth of $91.3 billion. And now, on the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, he is the 17th richest person in the world, richer than the three wealthiest members of Walmart's founding family, the Waltons. Nvidia has been the primary beneficiary of the boom in artificial intelligence with its so-called AI accelerator chips. The company now has a market value above $2.5 trillion. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Doug. The list of Wall Street banks mandating workers get back to the office is growing. We get details from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger in New York.
Citigroup, HSBC, and Barclays are ordering more staffers to report to company offices 5 days a week. Citigroup is requiring about 600 U.S. employees previously eligible to work remotely to commute to company offices full-time. At HSBC, shifting regulations affect about 530 staff in New York, roughly half of its workforce in the city. And Barclays will require thousands of investment banking staff globally to spend 5 days a week in the office or traveling to see clients. The banks were among Wall Street's more flexible in allowing employees to continue working remotely after the pandemic. The changes come as the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, the U.S. brokerage industry's main watchdog, is set to reinstate pre-pandemic rules for monitoring workplaces in the coming weeks. In New York, Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Another banking note this morning. Nomura Holdings has more than doubled pay for its top managers as earnings at Japan's largest brokerage rebounded on booming domestic markets. The total compensation paid to the firm's 8 executive officers rose 150% to more than $28 million. Finance ministers and central bank governors from the Group of 7 nations gathering in Italy. This comes before the Leaders' Summit in June, which Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky is expected to attend. And Bloomberg's Oliver Crook is covering the meeting in Italy.
The G7 really needs to show unity, particularly on the question of Ukraine. I mean, Janet Yellen was saying this yesterday, that Putin is waging a war of attrition, and they really need to show that they're in here for the long haul, and they can reassure Ukraine that its war funding is on sound footing for really not just this year, but also the years to come.
Bloomberg's Oliver Crook also says China's trade practices will also be on the agenda. The White House has responded to Senate Republicans who blocked a bipartisan border security bill. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
In a written statement, President Biden said if Republicans cared about securing the border, they would have voted for the bill. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer after the vote.
I understand that bill was not going to win every Democratic vote or every single Republican vote. That's what bipartisanship is. It's a compromise.
6 Democrats joined Republicans in blocking the measure, including California Senator Alex Padilla.
It includes arbitrary border closures and could practically eliminate the right to seek asylum for people fleeing for their safety.
And even if it had passed, the Senate Republican leaders have made it clear the bill would have been dead on arrival in the House. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
And a growing number of Americans may be thinking that college is not worth it. Let's get more in this report from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
Close to 30% say a college degree is not worth the expense. The new Pew poll also says almost half of those surveyed think it is helpful, but only as long as they don't need to take out a loan. But only 22% say a college degree is worth it even with a student debt. 4 in 10 say it is not at all important in getting a good job. Now, a recent report from the Fed showed most see education as a path to greater financial well-being. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Ed. And sources are telling Bloomberg Elon Musk's SpaceX has initiated discussions about selling existing shares at a price that could value the closely held company at roughly $200 billion. Let's get more in this report from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
Sources tell Bloomberg SpaceX is discussing a tender offer that may kick off in June. The price for the offer has not been decided, but sources say SpaceX is weighing offering shares at $108 to $110 apiece. A $200 billion valuation would be a premium to the $180 billion valuation the company obtained through its most recent tender offer. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Charlie. And that brings us to 5:07 on Wall Street. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, John. It is the unofficial start to summer. Both the roads and airport runways are getting busy ahead of the long Memorial Day weekend. At Philadelphia International Airport, Public Affairs Manager Heather Redfern says they anticipate a high number of travelers passing through. Redfern says they had the TSA lines ready with many transportation security agents to speed up the screening process.
Security lines have been busy all day long, but they're moving. The TSA is getting people through at PHL.
Airport officials are predicting nearly 30% more air travelers will take off this long holiday weekend compared to last year. Former President Trump held a campaign rally in New York City yesterday. Trump spoke in the South Bronx, one of the bluest areas of the country. He's trying to woo black and Hispanic voters.
Our black population and our Hispanic population who are losing their jobs, losing their housing, losing everything they can lose.
Audio courtesy of ABC 7. The district is more than 50% Hispanic and 30% black. Several people in the crowd weren't impressed by Trump's visit.
Look what he did in the White House. All the stuff he did in the White House and all the women he harassed. Bad man.
Trump is vowing to be better than President Biden on key issues, including immigration and the economy. President Biden and the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, hosted a state dinner for Kenyan President William Ruto and his wife, Rachel Ruto. During a toast, President Biden said that he was honored to host the world leader, touting their shared beliefs in freedom, democracy, and equality.
We share a strong respect for the history that connects us together.
So far, there's no Democratic presidential candidate on Ohio's November ballot. However, the governor is looking to change that to ensure President Biden is on it. Ohio's Republican Governor Mike DeWine is calling a rare special session of the GOP Majority General Assembly Tuesday to put a Democratic presidential candidate on the fall ballot. DeWine says failing to do so is simply not acceptable, calling it a ridiculous and absurd situation. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg John.
Michael, thank you. And that brings us to 5:10 on Wall Street. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. And for that, good morning, John Stashower.
Good morning, John. The Celtics are 10-2 in the NBA playoffs. The two losses were Game 2s at home versus Miami in the first round, Cleveland in the second. Celtics able to win Game 2 with Indiana. In the East Finals, easier victory than the series opener, which needed overtime. Boston had a 20-0 run in the first half. Went on to win 126-110 for Jaylen Brown. 40 points to match his career playoff high. Double overtime on the ice. Edmonton star Connor McDavid with a tip-in 32 seconds into the second OT. The Oilers won 3-2 in Dallas. The Stars are now 0-3 in Game 1s. All at home. The Rangers just lost their first Game 1 at home, shut out by Florida. And Rangers coach Peter Laviolette had a chance to look at the tape.
Go back and look at the chances. It's kind of an even game. Like the whole thing's kind of even. It sits around the 50% mark, but I just look at some of the crispness and the execution and the skating and the movements and the coverage. Not a lot, but there's just things that I felt like we could have done better that maybe could have pushed it in our direction.
Game 2 tonight at the Garden, where the Rangers now lost their last 2. They've scored only 1 goal. At Stadium, Yankees got home runs from Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge. 40th time they've homered in the same game, and the Yanks are 36-4 in those games. They shut out Seattle 5-0. Luis Gil continues to be a revelation, only in the rotation due to the Garrett Cole injury. He's had 6 straight starts where he hasn't allowed more than 1 run. Phillies won again. They've won 22 of the last 26. Historic news from college sports. The NCAA for the first time will begin to outright pay its athletes. A deal struck to settle pending lawsuits and prevent future ones. The NCAA will pay $2.7 billion in damages to current and former athletes, only from schools and Power 5 conferences and only for the past decade. It will also begin starting next year to pay athletes out of a revenue-sharing plan. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. John and Nathan.
All right, John, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Yeah, we're coming up on 5:13 on Wall Street. As I just said, the major stock averages, they indicate maybe a higher cash open on Wall Street this morning as we head into the long holiday weekend in the U.S., also the U.K. Let's get you set up for the trading day ahead. We're joined by our first guest, Patrick Armstrong, the Chief Investment Officer at Plurimi Wealth. Patrick, good morning to you. Thanks for being with us.
Morning.
Major averages didn't get the pop yesterday that some had expected from Nvidia's results. Does it look like the data are back in the driver's seat for investors?
Macroeconomic data has been very supportive. Company-specific data has been very supportive. We're now past the earnings window for almost all the companies now, so it probably will be macro, the Fed, and what's happening there driving markets in the early summer weeks. And overwhelmingly, that's been supportive. The market did take a bit of a breather yesterday based on a Fed that's showing they're not ready to cut. And I'm not surprised by that, though, because the employment backdrop's still pretty robust. Inflation's sticky. It would be negligent for the Fed to be cutting in this kind of environment, in my opinion.
What do investors latch onto next?
You latch on to a broadening of growth that you've had very strong U.S. growth through the first half of this year. You're starting to see Europe participate in that growth as well. Not to the same trajectory as the U.S., but it is a global recovery now where the world growth is expanding. PMIs in Europe are above 50 again. Services across the world is very strong, and that's translating into earnings growth. So at the start of the year, people were latching on to a Fed that was going to be cutting aggressively. And the markets don't need that, I don't think. It's earnings that really drive markets over the long term, and I think that's where the strength of the market's going to come from.
Yeah, we just about wrapped up. Actually, a few more companies left in this quarter. What are the major takeaways from earnings season so far?
It's a healthy market because companies that beat and guided higher, the market really rewarded. You saw that with Nvidia yesterday, but companies that beat and gave weak guidance, the market's punished. So it's a great environment to be a stock picker. Overwhelmingly, though, companies did beat. Analysts were expecting 2% earnings growth in Q1 coming into the quarter, and we're coming out of it with almost 6% earnings growth. So it's been a positive tailwind for markets and a healthy market where winners are being rewarded.
How are you guys positioning right now?
So we're overweight equities, not massively. We're short duration because we do think inflation sticks around, and the Fed cuts that everyone's anxious for, waiting for, I'm not sure they are going to materialize. So you want to own equities that are participating in economic growth. You don't want equities that are reliant on stimulus and a cutting Fed, though. So I don't mind having cyclicality. If you can combine cyclicality with a real structural growth like Nvidia, those kind of stocks still make sense to me, despite the run they've had.
So from your view, what's overpriced, what's underpriced right now, and how do you play that?
So the things people think about being overpriced are the best performers. I still love 6 of the Magnificent 7. I own only 4 of them, but all of those have basically monopolistic properties that are going to give them pricing power and earnings growth. I also like the defense sector and energy as a hedge on geopolitical risks. property companies, a lot of the utilities that aren't actually energy generators because there are interest rate sensitivity in those two sectors. I think those sectors are still at risk of further downside this year.
Okay, I can get close to 5% two-year yield. Is that a place to park somebody?
Reasonable, or you just go up a little bit on the risk spectrum and you get 5.5%, 5.7% in AA rated bonds from senior bank or senior bonds from banks. So there's nothing wrong with that. You're going to beat inflation with that. I think you can do better, but I do prefer the front end of the curve to the long end of the curve. I think we're going to end this year where you've got 5% Fed funds rate, 5% 2-year, and probably a 5% Treasury 10-year yield as well.
When's the next Fed cut? The obligatory question at the end, about 10 seconds.
50-50 if it happens this year. It won't happen until September if it does happen.
You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond. Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco. Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm John Tucker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.